But because we do develop in our relationships and our responsibilities, and sin has opened our eyes to see things we are unable to handle, we have developed some pretty sneaky ways of avoiding the difficulties of relationship and the difficulties of responsibility. One of those actually started in the Enlightenment as a political thought process with Immanuel Kant and others, that they wanted to get authorities off their back. And that's the root of the sovereign self. But however, the idea of the sovereign self morphed way out of the political realm into the individual realm, which is very typical of American culture, being individualistic. So the sovereign self means that, well, if I feel it and think it, then that's my truth. And it is both, you can't challenge it because the person is convinced that they think it. But you put the idea of the sovereign self, that you are sovereign over yourself, you choose what you become. You're not relegated to be a plumber because your dad was a plumber. You're not relegated to be a housewife because your mom was a housewife. It's all on your shoulders. The best illustration I know of that is how hard parents are willing to work or cheat to get their kids in an Ivy League school. And that's pretty current now because that's on the way to being the top of all the sovereign selves. And so what we've done is we've developed a performance culture, meaning we think we live in a meritocracy, that there are no frictions in the way. Everybody's got a level playing field. And therefore, if you succeed, it's up to you. Or if you fail, it's up to you. And believe it or not, that I think undergirds a great deal of the depression and emotional weakness we see in college students today. Their eyes have been opened to a falsehood, and they think that they're totally responsible for their development. And if they fail, it's all on them, and it's a weight they cannot bear. So that's what I mean by the sovereign self and our performance culture causing weight that erodes mental and emotional health. Second is the issue of unlimited choice. We'll talk about that with a simple quote from Dr. Barry Schwartz's book, The Paradox of Choice. And then the one that I've spent most of the time in and most of the time with people about is the invisible distance between the actual world and the virtual world. The actual world is this concrete, objective world we live in that when you bump into a wall, you stop and it hurts. The virtual world is the video game that you get so many lives each round, and as soon as that round is over, you just start again and get more lives. But in the real world, when you're in a car wreck and die, it's all over with. What's important to the Christian and the church is there is nothing virtual about Christianity. It is all actual in the real world. Even the gospel itself is objective and actual, and that's what makes Christianity believable. What was most important took place in time, space, and history. So let's talk about quickly the sovereign self and explain it a little bit. Truth is affirmed by what I feel is true, and it is both ungrounded and unchallengeable. In America, it's probably at its peak concerning other countries in the world because of radical American individualism. I don't need anybody else. The weight of what I become is totally up to me, and that's a pressure no one can handle. College level, it does lead to a great deal of depression and angst, and it leaves one removed from the shaping influences of relationships and responsibilities. If it's up to me, I don't need other people. Second, unlimited choice. The more choices we have, the more freedom we have, right? That's what we think. But listen to this one clip from Barry Schwartz's book. As a culture, we are enamored of freedom, self-determination, and variety. And we are reluctant, oops, that's a misspelling, to give up any of our options. But clinging tenaciously to all the choices available to us contributes to bad decisions, to anxiety, stress, and dissatisfaction, even to clinical depression. Next time you go to the grocery store, count how many different types of ketchup you can choose between. It will drive you crazy. Finally, the invisible distance between the actual world and the virtual world. The virtual world plus the ideas of sovereign self and unlimited choice, are rooted in the desire that manufactured experiences promise to save us from confrontations with a world that resists our will. The reason kids spend time on their phone is in texting and never talking, on their phone instead of in-person relationships. And when they are in person, they seldom talk to each other. They're texting each other or texting other friends, is because they have found personal relationships too sticky. And they are in a hard course run for what they think of as frictionless relationships. At the college level, they like their virtual representation of themselves and of their friends because they can pick and choose the parts they like and kick out the parts they don't. And that's what we mean by frictionless relationships. And that takes away how relationships can actually shape us and strengthen us. It is the friction and oppositions of the world that develop us, not the easy days. Now that, see if I can get back to Zoom now. Here we go. Is probably way too much, way too fast, but I intend those as talking points about, okay, how does that really relate to the lack of emotional stability and mental health on our college campuses? A couple other comments. Jim, you asked me in an email just to me about me mentioning that the mental health clinic at U of L was stacked up. It wasn't U of L, it was college campuses across the country. And for the few colleges that are still meeting in in-person classes, it has continued to get worse. If you just fill your Google search bar with depression or emotional health in college students, you will have so many articles, both popular and scholarly, you could never read them all. And the students that are now left alone and the clinics had to close, they're worse off because the clinic or their therapist or counselor was part of their security plan, or maybe even a support group, and those got shut down. So it is a huge time for emotional and mental unrest. I am good friends with the retired chief of Army chaplains, and the biggest work for our U.S. forces this side is two things: homelessness, but it's related to the issue of mental illness, and then suicide. It's a plague of suicides in our vets. It's amazing. And there is a considerable rise in suicides of pastors. There's not a lot written about that, but there needs to be. So we'll start there and we'll go what direction. Derek knows some of my thinking. I didn't cover some of the things we talked about, but Derek, you have some ideas you might want to throw into.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you had said earlier in the week that I think we kind of hung on a little bit was just the idea of how certain language in research or in theories or, in an idea, like the language is violating the idea that they're proclaiming. And since you have said that, it's just been on my mind. And in our work we use a lot of language. I was just talking to a guy this morning. He's somehow had a positive drug screen. He can't figure out how it happened. And so how we use language in that situation is very important. If I try to use language that forces him to tell me that he actually used versus using language that allows him to express himself, I get a very different conversation.
Yes.
And I think, I gained a lot from you explaining that and giving a couple of examples. So I think that might be another little bullet point to kind of talk about as well.
Yeah, well, so you'll get a little bit of context of that. Though most of my study and reading has been in the biblical and theological realm, I have spent for the last many years reading in the secular psychology world and neuroscience. And almost every single book I read that's not Christian, that's secular, has a distinctive evolutionary perspective. Even the psychologists and psychiatrists that aren't evolutionary psychologists, their perspective is still that. So in those books, you find terrific research and the most ridiculous application you have ever thought of, because they're not rooted in truth. My favorite story is when they talk about our limbic brain system and our adrenal response to threat, our fight, flight, or freeze thing. And they talked about the older part of our brain, our lizard brain, and how it developed when we were hunter-gatherers. And the hunter always had to be on the alert in case there was a saber-toothed tiger in the bush. And I'm thinking, how did you go from good science to cartoon immediately? Because we never really know if that situation actually happened. But that's one of their proof stories of application. And I always wanted to know, if that's the older part of my brain, why am I still scared as if I'm scared of saber-toothed tigers and it hasn't evolved over the years? Anyway, that's where it came from, because the language of the evolutionary psychologists always betrays that they're design-oriented. They say we're hardwired for these things. Evolution gave us. Evolution doesn't give anything. As I understand it, it's chance and random, which I don't think that actually exists in real life. But that's where Jarek and I started. And then he started thinking about language and taking it each step further. And it is of huge importance. Language, it roots us or it uproots us. Sherry Turkle's book, by the way, this is a resource you may be interested in if you do work with college students. Reclaiming Conversation. She's probably the foremost authority in the nation on what the cellular world and electronic world has done to our college kids and their conversational ability, relational ability, and mental and emotional health. She did a great work in that book. I wish I had time to give you more of her information. But I think the core of what we're talking about is, why is this going on now? Why are our kids, we're all old enough, except a couple of you young guys, and I don't want to insult anybody, but those of you that are around my age, would you have thought of living in your parents' home when you were 30? No. I'm not even sure my parents would have allowed me to. I don't mean that as an insult today, but that it's just the way society has shifted, a norm. The other thing is, when you talk to kids, college kids even, can you get them to look you in the eye most of the time if it's not somebody you know?
You know, Tony, that reminds me, I spent a lot of time on college campuses, and
Yes,
at least one of them most, which is University of Louisville. And for some reason, I have noticed last few years, I run into a personality type, which we used to call them nerds or geeks. People who seem to be really into, I don't know, a lot of electronic stuff, but they don't seem really well at, skilled at relational skills and just relaxing. You do have a tough time getting them to look in the eye. They have a lot of quirks. Maybe they're on, what do they call it, on the, what's the word for it?
Spectrum?
On the spectrum, yeah, something. You just get that feel, and they seem so much more common. I'm just wondering, is this normal? Am I just getting lucky and keep running into them, or is it because of social media? What's going on?
There's a term for some of that behavior. It's called phubbing, P-H-U-B-B-I-N-G. It is texting while maintaining eye contact with the person you're talking to in person. So you're never there. You're always on your phone. Mm-hmm. It's crazy what technology has done to our thinking. One interviewer at a business said, when college kids graduate and come see them, they interview them and they do great because they prepared for that singular interview and the known questions. And the interviewer said that she asked them then to prepare a summary of their conversation and come back with more creative questions. And the kids freak out because they're going, oh, I thought we were just going to have one interview. They're totally unprepared for it because it's the real world. You got to think on your feet. You would not believe the number of kids in surveys that talk about the inability to think on their feet or to call a friend during a time of grieving. That kind of human interaction, it has actually been cut off. And I think that's where the mental and the emotional weakness comes in. You just don't know how to bump up against people and have conversation and realize that's how you learn to live in the world.
Yeah. So from what you said, I took a few notes here that number one, you said the success and failure is all on them, or they feel that it is. And then of course, if they do run into that kind of a situation where they haven't prepared as well, or it's outside of their realm of expertise, I'd imagine that would make them feel even more anxious and fearful. Can I possibly ask Dickie to make any comments right now from your perspective, if you have any thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Dickie. I'm not hearing you. I don't know why.
He's muted.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, go ahead.
I've tried to just get oriented to the discussion here. I haven't been on a college campus in years, and I spend most of my time in an office clinical setting seeing patient after patient. So my world is my patient's world. So at this moment in time, I'm trying to think on my feet, as you just commented, and trying to get oriented to the discussion here to see if I can contribute anything.
Good. You're muted now, Jim.
Yeah, this is a bigger question than even just the college campus. I'm interested in that because I work on a college campus, and that's very important. But part of it has been spurred, and I think Dickie, you and I talked this through on the phone a couple of weeks ago, is just what's been happening this year, which certainly isn't just limited to college campuses. You've got this virus, and then the restrictions put in place, the lockdowns all across the country, which affect everybody. And then you've got racial unrest on different campuses, different cities, people who are, we've had it here in Louisville most recently because of the Breonna Taylor case. You may have heard of that, and that was very controversial, but other things, the George Floyd situation and others. I come from Seattle and Portland. I was born in Portland. I spent just years, my educational years were all in Seattle virtually, and it just disturbs me when I see people kind of going nuts. They also seem largely to be fairly young people. Strangely enough, they're actually probably more white people than black people, at least in the ones in Portland and Seattle. And then you've got the other statistics we've been talking about, the rising suicide rate, the rising depression rate, which has started somewhere. I heard that the starting point for that upward decline, or an upward incline, excuse me, in these bad statistics, anxiety, depression, and suicide, was right about the time that the iPhone became extremely, almost not universal, but maybe more than 50% of the people in the United States, or young people, had iPhones. I don't know whether they can link that together, but it just seems to me we've got all kinds of problems. And when I see things, like you said, Tony, you and I and Dickie have been around a while, and Jim and Donna, you have too. And I've seen racial unrest, and I've seen viruses before, and I haven't seen people's behavior this traumatic. I don't know how else to say it. Traumatic, volatile, people attacking each other, hating each other, cursing each other, lighting buildings on fire, tearing statues down. I just have never seen this before. at least not to this degree. So we're trying to get a handle on a lot of this stuff. It's bigger than the college campus though. So that's kind of where we're going on this.
Well, when you have a presidential debate where one man interrupts the other candidate so much he tells him to shut up on national TV, and we've had feigned anger and rage on political debates for years, it's hard to expect that our common people would have the wherewithal to have a conversation of disagreement and do it kindly. We've just about lost the ability to do it, and that's because we're driven emotionally. If I feel it, that's true, but it also keeps us from having those conversations that conflict. And when kids run into minor troubles in life, they don't have any equipment to deal with it. Illustration that would be the young marrieds that I've worked with for years in our church. A whole string of very fine young men leading a family well. They come in their early 30s. They've had 2 to 3 children. They're working a job and a half to pay the bills. Their cars are old because you can't afford a new one, and they're just falling apart at the seams. And most of them, there were some who had stronger extenuating circumstances, but most of them had found out that they spent their lives building the first story of their life on 2 weeks of studs. And now that they've added the second floor, they don't have a structure to hold it up. Whereas my parents' generation, who grew up having a responsibility as soon as they were able to walk almost, that responsibility and their relationships, because they worked with people, strengthened their soul to where they weren't afraid to bump into things. My generation was spared a lot, but goodness, I'm glad I grew up when I did.
Yeah, me too. First of all, I have a illustration or a story to throw out, which might illustrate this a bit. But before I do, any questions, Songhuan or Philip or Jim and Donna? Do you have any concerns? I'm concerned, and are you feeling?
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a retired high school English teacher, and back in 1990, I had a very interesting assignment, leave of absence. I was to go to 4 different colleges, take the first composition and the first literature course, which was offered with the idea of finding out from our school district what schools do in those freshman composition and literature classes and how we can prepare them better. Excuse me, in 3 of those 4 classes, schools, it seemed like they were extremely teacher frontal oriented. Students were very passive and quiet. I didn't see conversation. In one of the schools, Wheaton College, that I went to, it seems like there were almost discipline problems in the class. The students were responding enthusiastically, making jokes out of the material, having a wonderful time learning. And this was back in 1990 when I think, so I don't see that this, lack of conversation is something terribly new. I think back then, I kind of wonder, where are the teachers who just really try to get students to interact and express their ideas and be enthusiastic about them? Are the teachers, instructors, professors in schools now, are they trying to kind of, work against the, virtual environment by bringing students out, or aren't they? I don't know.
Some colleges are actually offering a course on basic conversational tactics, how to engage different subjects, and that's a course for credit because their students don't have the ability to do that. Others, I think, probably promote the isolation because it's too easy to use technology to teach your class.
So Derek, I saw you smile there. What were you smiling about?
In my work, almost no matter what the goals are going to be, we end up starting with communication, starting with being able to articulate emotions, articulate feelings, be able to make distinctions between feelings so that they're being named and applied correctly. And, I think I I was smiling because I myself, without the education that I've had, would probably also struggle with that because, I think naturally kind of my generation, we've got a sense of if it feels bad, it is bad. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes that feeling bad is important. Sometimes that struggle is clarifying. It's, if you want to go to, the what John talks about Jesus saying, that pruning process, that removal of distraction process can be painful. And if pain is your measurement for bad, that can stunt your growth in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I was just watching, and this is somewhat anecdotal too, but I was watching a video last night, case a few years ago, I think it was in 2016, in Yale University, where they had, oh boy, I can't remember what the issue was, but one of the Yale professors had made a comment somewhere, I think it might have been on social media or it might have been more on an official website, that, wow, what was it? Something that wasn't very politically correct somehow, but it was reasonable. It was something about students taking more responsibility, or I can't remember what it was, but then a big confrontation happened in one of the outdoor quads where apparently all the students lived, and the students were verbally just attacking. It wasn't the professor herself, but it was her husband, and just the things coming out of their mouth was extremely aggressive. You're here for me, you need to listen, look me in the eye. This is a student telling a professor this.
I think that was over Halloween costumes, Jim.
Was it? Okay, can you explain a little more about that? Well, they were appropriating, weren't they?
Yeah, the students, some of them were upset, saying that some of the costumes were racially offensive or inappropriate. And the professor basically told them, they were also dorm parents, the professors, basically told them, hey, it's just a kid game. Those don't mean anything. And they both ended up losing their jobs over it. The administration wouldn't even support the professors. The wife felt her life was threatened and left, and then the husband lost his job, all because he was not culturally sensitive enough to these students. And yeah, it was a nasty thing. Strange that the students could say anything they wanted to the professors and it wasn't offensive. And they did, they lost their jobs.
Yeah, what struck me was just the behavior and sort of emotional attitude of these students. They're all what, 20, 21 years old? And they're verbally attacking the professor and acting as if he has no right to say anything. You need to be quiet and listen to how we're feeling. Don't you care about how I feel? Something to the effect of, the key point here is not educational or intellectual development, but making us feel at home. And this is Yale University. I mean, Yale University is supposed to be, one of the top educational, intellectual centers of, and then the guy who was doing the video went on to show how the administration has shifted and added all these new posts, sort of bureaucratic posts to Yale University, which really don't have a whole lot to do with the education, but trying to make students feel more at home, or have a dean. There's now a dean of diversity and a dean of this and dean of that really don't have to do with much intellectual or academic, just trying to make students feel more comfortable. And I'm just wondering what's going on in these students, because I just don't see how I would have acted that way, or anybody in my generation going to college would have acted that way over something which seems to be relatively minor. Now, again, maybe I'm not sensitive enough.
Are you familiar with the terms microaggression and trigger warnings? Can you imagine any class that you went to in college having a trigger warning over a piece of literature that was already 200 years old? Or maybe 2,000 years old? Oh, there's something racially offensive or culturally offensive here, so we have to put a trigger warning up. I mean, you can't even read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Right.
And a microaggression might be something that you said without intention at all, but someone else heard it and their feelings were hurt, and just pitch a fit and you get attention.
Yeah, so what's going on? I'm trying to figure out what's going on, healthy and unhealthy, in the emotions there. I mean, all of us get offended at times, and we feel uncomfortable and say, oh, well, I'm not in a situation right here where I would have rather feel more comfortable than I do, but we don't end up behaving like that. We don't end up getting in the face of people who are, I don't know how to put it, but people in positions of what we would say positions of authority, and just saying, you need to be quiet and listen to how I feel. And I'm going to pitch, like you said, I'm effectively going to have a tantrum here. What's going on there emotionally with these young people?
I'm wondering, were their parents the same? Were they brought up in a household where you have to stop and listen to me? If you don't listen, you don't love me, and are just kind of coddled and spoiled. So it's actually a natural transition for them to be that way in college. What do you think?
I kind of think through this through the lens. I've got a handful of domestic violence clients right now, and I don't use this language with them, but God very clearly designed us to have dominion over things. And in my world, we use the word control or dominance, but it's really, we were created to have dominion over something. We were created to be powerful over something. And, a very simplistic, I know I have a doctorate level counselor and a psychiatrist on the call. So this is a very simplistic definition of anger, but it's what I use with my folks, is that anger is either an unmet demand or an unmet expectation in some form. And usually when you get the anger outburst, that really strong reaction, it's an unmet demand. You were trying to have dominion over something, and that was violated or rejected or, over-dominated by what you were trying to do. And it just sets off this reaction. Unmet expectations can remain frustration, but sometimes it can lead to anger if it happens over and over. And so if the message of you have no dominion is delivered enough, you either become angry or you become helpless often. And so when I'm watching all of this, I think what's being violated in a lot of ways from a biblical perspective is we are realizing the fragility of our idols. And we're, for the younger crowd, the idols that show up in pictures on social media, they're being violated. We're all realizing that what we have believed in is now not what we thought it was, that perfect and beaches and awesome clothes and funny, memes are not real. There's a violation of that reality. And I think that just, it shocks the system, I think, a little bit, when what we've held on to as firm is violated. And so to me, the unrest, whether you're talking about, the pandemic and everything that has been so easily affected by the stroke of a pen, and gentlemen and ladies wearing white coats, there's a fragility to our world. And I think that shocks people a little bit. And with the racial stuff, no matter which side that you're on, there's anger on both sides. And I think what's happening is both sides are being violated. Their ability to dominate the situation is being violated. And so they're lashing out, is kind of what I see.
I think that word fragile is good, Derek. Very good. You were talking about if these kids were raised by parents that were the same way. Fragility is one of the main things that a lot of folks talk about among our younger people and college students. And their opinion is that from their research, they've learned that parents have spent so much time protecting their children from harm, not even letting them play by themselves in the playground. They teach them to be fragile. So when they get to college, they have to stand on their own and something bothers them, they are easily hurt.
I mean, I've been thinking about some other things too. The Adam and Eve, you talked about Adam and Eve, and when I think of that story, and they talk about them originally being without shame about them being naked. Then when the fall happened, they began to feel that shame and covered themselves and then hid in the forest. I don't know, it just sounds to me like their vision of the world turned from looking outward at things, at God, at creation, and suddenly just started turning inward.
Yes.
They became narcissistic, like always concerned about themselves, because that seems to be a theme I'm seeing a lot too in American emotional fragility and emotional, getting anger is they're angry because you don't care about me, and everything is about me. The entire world has suddenly become about me. Am I off on this, or is that just sort of a human condition because of sin?
I think you're hitting at the core there, Jim. If we get turned in on ourselves, that is sin. And I mean, it sounds overly simple when you do it, but Derek's driving us there, rightly so, is what are the scriptures saying about our makeup? And what I think you're saying, Jim, is dead on, that we're simply manifesting what we actually are as fallen human creatures. And without redemption, number one, we can't even see our need. And number two, we don't have the power to work on the things within us as we are being remade into the image of our Creator.
Yeah. Go ahead, Derek.
Mark 14:9. It's in the NIV, is the one I've got in front of me. So I didn't look at the other versions, but it says, "But the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth and desire for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful." That choke just, I don't know, it gave me chills. Because if the word is being choked out, it's not only being choked out of the individual that has been, caught up with the worries of this life and the deceitfulness, it's choking the word, making it unfruitful, which means that not only is that person affected, but the people that person could affect now is unable to be affected by the word that's within them. So if I, as a Christian, I've got Jesus in me, and I've been taken up by the world and the deceitfulness of wealth and other things are causing me worry, and it's choking the word that I know out of my thinking and out of my relationships, I now have, I've stunted the ability for me to be used with others. I'm now much less of the vine producing, connected to the vine producing the fruit. I'm just kind of lying there. And so that choking of the word has an implication not only to me, but to those that I could have affected. And that's why I feel like right now we're seeing that widespreadness of this, because the word is being choked out and the truth isn't being inserted because of the worry of wealth and other things. It's kind of where my mind goes a little bit.
Okay, any comments on what Derek and Tony have said so far? You'll see where Derek's going with that? Do you agree with that? Do you see any illustrations?
I don't want to hog the floor, but what Derek's saying reminds me of Peter when he's talking about us being ready to give an answer for the truth of the hope that lies within us. And he follows that with do it gently. If I were having this conversation with someone who was struggling or seeking the Lord Jesus, I would probably use a great deal different terminology and definitely a different posture, because when we talk about it, and I'm very guilty of this, I can sound critical, but that's about the last thing a hurting heart needs is more criticism, no matter how cynical or how wrong they are. And what Derek is talking about, if we're saturated in the word, we're like Christ, then our penetration into this world that's upside down, we can turn it right side up. But the power really is in the spirit and our own gentleness, not so much in our overpowering the wrong ideas of the world. I think that's really important in thinking of that and realizing our perspective is eternal. Lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of this life, they're all passing away. But he that does the will of God lasts forever.
What are some practical things that we can do to help people? For example, we have a grandson who is a sophomore in high school. We have a really good relationship with him, but he is addicted to video games. What are some practical things you could do to help a person turn around?
Mm-hmm. That's why I said I'm thankful I didn't grow up in this era. The simplest answer I know to that question is take him fishing. Make him get dirty. Just be a person in this world. You do know that video game makers use the highest level of psychology known to man in designing those things. They give you just enough of a sense of when to suck you back in. Once a kid plays a game 2 or 3 times, it literally is addictive. Man, more suggestions? Everybody needs to think with us on that. That's a great question.
Yeah, let me chime in just because I did grow up in this world. He's got to think about 3 things. Number 1, I remember 3 experiences I had, and I'll go through them very quickly just because they're weird. And just like the scales fell off Paul's eyes, like that's how I felt when I saw this. I was playing a rather violent game called Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, and basically you play as the Sith, as the bad guys, and you're basically hunting Jedi down. It was just almost kind of like the Apostle Paul. All of a sudden, I could see it for what it was. And I wanted nothing more to do with it. It was weird. And that was the second to last time I ever played a Star Wars game. I couldn't stomach it anymore. I couldn't take it. It was crazy. I was playing a Lord of the Rings game next, and I realized all of a sudden the same thing happened. It's as if I could see something different that wasn't there before. And so I put that down. I was like, well, that's enough of that. I can't take that anymore. And my third experience was with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I couldn't take it anymore. Those things make my soul hurt for some reason. I don't know how to explain it. And my 3 suggestions are this. Number 1, I mean, yeah, he's going to have to do something else with his day. He's going to have to put his effort towards something else. I realized that one thing I started doing is I started volunteering with the youth group downstairs at my church. I challenged myself. I said, if I can go a whole summer and not play a video game, I can practice what I preach if I tell them not to do the same thing. So the first thing I did is I had to be an example. If I was going to preach it, I had to practice it. And finally, ultimately, we have to look at what does God want? Does God want you to fill your eyes and all in your dopamine and all that stuff with those violent images and stuff? Most video games, if I had to guess, he's addicted to violent video games. And he needs to just take a look at the Bible and what it says and just ask, does God want this? Does God want you to sit on your butt all day and do this? Because the answer is because based on the original Garden of Eden model, the answer is no. He wants you out in nature. I've got no idea if they even answered the question or not.
I think you
Good
did.
input, Philip.
What about you, Derek? Anything else? Or go ahead, Donna.
Can I, I'm sorry.
The grandson has no interest in anything about the Lord.
How old is he?
15.
15. Healthy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I
The,
ask a question?
Sure.
How do you know how good he is and what game he playing? Probably you don't know, but
He's
Is-
very good.
okay. So I mean, it can be well because I'm teaching sports management. I'm teaching sport governance now right now and then actually I don't know. Nowadays, there's esports. So the kids, the high school kids play games and they go to college and they play for the
Yeah.
so athletic department. So now it's big. And then I know a lot of Christian university taking the teams and maybe, I mean, it can be a job right now. So I don't know how he's, I don't know, maybe it can be a big deal for the high school kids, but maybe he can have some clear development through the game. So I mean, I have just different perspective because when we see the kids playing games, even my kids, they dictated play game. They begging for playing game every single time if they have free time. So, but I think if you can start talking about if he like to play that much, and then you can discuss about there's like a college that you can play game for scholarship and things, something. So maybe you can start talking about some, not about the game, like how or what game. Maybe you have to, then probably you can just, there's some college that offer some scholarship for playing games but I mean, there's some like different direction. I know it's not really kind of like how gonna solve he's gonna be away from the game, but I don't think you can do that to away from the game. But I think that he can have another option that, there is something that you can, something do with a playing game. So that, I mean, I don't know.
When you mention playing games, do you mean video games or regular games?
There is so many games. Now they can be a millionaire. I don't know, you have heard some newspaper talk about one of the guy won the like $1 million in a game. Then their parents get, so happy to be playing games and kind of stuff. So it's a different world now because he can be rich, if you play really good.
That's what he wants to do. He wants to become a professional.
Yes. So,
at least now.
Yeah. So that's kind of, yeah, it's kind of, there's a new industry that they offer to students who really want to play games, and they give a scholarship and they offer all the education and play games and even career for, for future. So even they looking for coach and so it's a kind of new industry right now. So maybe you can talk about him with some clear, career development through that, the game stuff. Then I think that's kind of option that, then make sure that he need to study though. I mean, I think that's kind of way that, they need a lot of practice, and also they're athletes. They look as athletes now. So I think that there's one way that you can start, I mean, for the conversation with him, then give him some more future. I don't know. It's not therapy, but there's an option that as a sports management perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry. What he's referring to is basically this is a picture I found of the Fortnite World Championship, and it's esports. He's right. It really is a thing, and people win all. Like, this was a kid holding the trophy. Like, it's a kid who got filthy stinking rich because he could play Fortnite really well.
It sounds to me like you're suggesting that he gets deeper into video games rather than getting more into reality and social conversation.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is this. It can benefit him to be very good at those things. The problem is, in the NBA, everyone gets paid whether they win a championship or not. And the reality is, only the winner in these video game championships gets paid anything. That there might be a little bit of runner-up money, But unless he wins, he's wasting his time. I knew a guy at college who played Call of Duty all day long. It started off as a first-person shooter game about World War II, and now it has modern weapons and all kinds of futuristic stuff in it now. And he played Call of Duty all day long. And he expected to go to London and win $50,000 in a championship. Well, he went to London, blew all his money living in London, didn't win the championship, and had to drop out of school. The reality is it only pays to do these things if you're the absolute #1 winner. And you might want to talk to him about and show him some statistics. How realistic of a goal is that? Everyone who works 9 to 5 at least gets paid, whether they like it or not. You could spend your whole life playing this game, accomplish absolutely nothing, and then lose and have nothing to show for it. So my advice would be, he really needs to think about what are the odds of him winning, because in an ever-increasing environment where literally anybody can pick up a game and start playing, that's not good odds.
Mr. Lee, can you say your first name for me, please?
Hun.
I'll never pronounce it properly, but
That's okay. Yeah, that's
I
fine.
think
Yeah.
hidden in what you said, I mean, what Philip is saying is concrete reality. But I think hidden in what you said is a principal truth that we'd be mistaken to label all of that as bad and learn to look for the good, because that's our world now. And it's only going to develop further out that way. We're not going to get rid of computers and games.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about the collegiate level, not the professional level, I understand too.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn fast. Anything competitive at the collegiate level thins the crowd out really fast. So if you go that route, Philip, he would find out early on if he's really good enough to compete or not. When I left high school and went to college athletics, I was really good in high school. I was at the bottom of the ladder in college. So I think gaming is probably the exact same way. You reminded me of an old sermon by a man named Thomas Chalmers, 1800s, I think, called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. That the only way we give up one love is to find a greater love. And I think that principle is true in all of life. Definitely the gospel.
Yeah, that reminds me. So Jim, yeah, all I'm hearing is a couple of things, a little dose of reality for him to see that, well, you may have dreams. And this is the thing, I'm not going to want to throw cold water on anybody's dreams. You know, this is what we hear on the Disney movies every time. Just follow your dreams and you're going to make it, and you dream big. And even in the NBA, I'm sure about 95% of the basketball stars in high school dream of being in the NBA and they never make it. There's no way they possibly can. So there's reality there. Go ahead,
I think that we've talked about this long enough that I kind of get the drift of what people are saying, and maybe we want to talk about something else.
Can I say something before that, though?
Sure.
I'm not so sure that he has any dreams of even going to college or playing competitively. I think he just likes to have fun doing it all the time. And maybe, we can, and I kind of appreciate your idea, take him fishing. And that's something that I've tried to do for years and years and years. Every time I came over, we'd have play fighting in the living room until I finally told him the first time he beats me up is the last time we do it. And now he's a sophomore. And the ping pong table downstairs, which is kind of along those ideas. But I think maybe Don is right. Maybe we've discussed this long enough.
That's good. No, obviously current though.
But I think there's a good point there, what you brought up, Tony, this idea of replacing the affection, is that how you say it, with something else, right? And I just wanted to talk about the general, problem of these deep emotions, that we're going down a lot of destructive paths this year. And I say we, I mean collectively as the United States, it seems that way. But Now, you guys tell me who are more experts in this. The way I see it, and this is just a suggestion, is we've created some idols. I have decided that something is going to make me satisfied, content, and happy.
Mhm.
That thing, whatever it might be, whether it's pornography, whether it's gaming, whether it's maybe a goal for racial equity, whatever that means. And I've become disappointed. Like say in the Breonna Taylor case, I want justice, you know, I want justice. And then the decision comes down and I don't think that's just. And that's been sort of like an idol to me. And when our idols let us down, then we get really, that's when the visceral emotions come up, because we've been putting our visceral emotions into that one thing. If I could just get this thing, I would be happy, content, and satisfied. The world would be good. And it doesn't happen, or it lets me down. It may last for, maybe I do get it, but then it fades away or I lose it. Am I going down the right way there? Yes, Dickie.
Yeah, how much more time do we have? Before
I don't know, but my clock is up. I've got something else I've got to get to, and I hate to leave it.
I'll make a comment now, okay, before I leave. In the world that I live in, it's very microcosmic. Someone comes into the office, wants help for a problem, and then we create a therapeutic alliance and a contract, and we try to work on their problem. I'm the boss, and I control the 25 minutes or the 55 minutes that we meet. And we play by my rules. And a lot of people come in with a lot of intense emotions. They want to get some help or some solution to their emotional problems. But they're not going to get that help unless they play by my rules. And so we establish certain ground rules and create a therapeutic alliance and then try to work on the problems. If they start to violate those rules, the relationship often comes to an abrupt end and they don't work with me anymore because they don't want to play by my rules. I think these general principles are applicable in a psychiatric visit. They're applicable in a family setting when I'm dealing with my children. And then it's applicable in society at large, where everything's become unmoored and there are no rules anymore. And so I think that's part of the reason why you see these people throwing temper tantrums in the street and creating all kinds of rioting and violence and looting. The whole fabric of society has become unmoored, and you see raw emotions. People need to deal with their emotions, but it's got to be done in a controlled setting, and sometimes you need medications to control those emotions. So I think that the solution to the problem is to restore the overall, well, let's put it this way, law and order, if you want to call it that, law and order in my office so that I can do my job and function and not go crazy myself, law and order in the family. And I don't mean that that's without love, but I mean, there are certain ground rules in the family, and if you don't adhere to them, we can't function as a family. But you know, after a while, that becomes understood. So it's not like I'm promoting a system of law here, right? As Jim knows me very well, I'm very grace-oriented, and I love people who embrace that message. But underlying it all is a lot of foundational self-control and adherence to the general rules of relationships in society, which it sounds to me from Tony, it sounds like people don't even know what those are anymore. They don't know how to conduct themselves in relational situations. They just haven't been taught that, or they haven't practiced them or learned them. I had to go to a psychiatric residency for 3 years before I started understanding emotions and feelings. But I don't know if that answers your question about why emotions have become so out of control these days, but that's my simple answer to it in the time remaining.
Thank you.
Even Law and Order and debates?
Well, I heard some discussion about that Lincoln and Douglas weren't even that controlled in their debates. They said there was some swearing going on there that you couldn't even publish in your transcripts of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So
It's not new.
that's a couple of 100 years ago, but they weren't as self-controlled as we fantasize them to be. I think I think the debate was a picture of the divide in the country, and it was just an unleashing of all the animosities coming out there in that debate. But every setting requires a certain set of ground rules.
Did you know in the Lincoln Douglas debates, some of the rebuttals would last for 30 minutes and the crowd could understand it?
Nice.
Big
Yeah,
difference.
those are when the general public probably was a little more generally better educated, and
We
more
were
people.
literate then.
Well, Dickie, also what you reminded me of in saying this, the ground rules, is, would I be correct in, maybe if I want to find a Bible reference, an early one is when God confronts Cain and he says, sin is crouching at your door and you must master it. Is that related to what he has? Cain apparently hasn't learned how to master his own emotions. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Certainly, we all have to master our emotions. But yeah, I mean, but Cain lived in an era when there was no law. He didn't get the death penalty for what he did. That wasn't until after the flood. So mastering his emotions was important, but as far as society went at that time, people did anything they wanted to do sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there is the issue of rulership that comes in at the very beginning of Genesis, and God tells Adam and Eve to rule over creation and subdue it. And so there's a certain, probably there would have been some understanding of what it meant to rule over something, but he hadn't learned how to rule over himself yet. And that's, boy, I don't know, that seems like a missing ingredient today too. People aren't learning how to master themselves.
Hey guys, I hate to do it, but I've got to escape and get to something else. Thank you for letting me spend time with you all. Hope something in there was helpful. Jim, thanks a bunch.
Yeah, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thanks, Tony.
All right.
We're
See you
gonna,
guys.
yeah, we're gonna shut it down in just a few minutes here anyway. I was thinking, what is it? Just a little before 8 o'clock Eastern time. So let's shut it down at 8 o'clock. And did you want to add anything, Ruth?
So I missed a lot of this, but I just was listening to the thing about video games, and I know Micah loved Nintendo, but he loved sharing that experience with Jim. So, you know, kind of like Tony was saying, if you can enter into his world a little bit, that's really like a great starting point to being able to have some other conversations about other things, because you're showing an interest in his world. And so, you know, I would just say, hey, maybe learn something new about what he likes and play a little. And even if you do badly, it's fine. You're just enjoying some time with him.
Yeah. Let me say something about video games. We did not ban video games in our household. They were allowed, but my kids had enough self-control where the video games did not dominate their lives. So they've got to have multiple interests, career interests, and other worthwhile pursuits that they're directing their lives into. My oldest is a year away from finishing his orthopedic surgery residency. So
Wow.
he doesn't have time for a lot of video games, but occasionally he'll enjoy a little time with his brother and sister, and they'll play games and have some fun. I think in that context, I don't have a big problem with it. And so you got to keep them focused and productive too, and instill that somehow in them. And then the games can be recreational and limited, and then not so destructive, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, and I know for Micah, he was very much into the artistry of it. So there's the whole computer programming aspect, there's the music aspect, there's the, digital production of it. There's, I mean, really, it's like a movie, and there's writing. So there's a lot of other aspects to it where you could point them to enjoy that, but then say, hey, you could do this for, a career. So
yeah, in fact, in Harrison, he's my oldest son. He was one of the best doing some of this like arthroscopic surgery, where it's like a video game.
yeah.
And he was very good at that because he was used to manipulating like a
Wow.
virtual image. So it can come in handy sometimes.
Yeah, but a lot of surgery is done by joystick now. So
Yeah,
there you
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know, Jim, other than trying to get him to the point where this thing that he cares about can include other people or include another community of real people, even if it's other people who also enjoy that game. You know what I'm saying? So he can begin to have real face-to-face relationships with people rather than with an electronic game. I mean, this aspect of relationships to me seems really, really important. If it were for, our relationship with Jesus is so important. Even relationships, I was talking about idols, even relationships let us down a lot of the time. Now, those of us who are married, we know our spouses are wonderful, but they're not perfect and they can't meet our ultimate needs. And I just feel like I look around and my sense is, I haven't taken a survey or anything, but the students at University of Louisville, they might be on social media a lot, but they're incredibly lonely. That's what I think. And they need a relationship. And I would agree, Dickie, a relationship that has rules. That's the nice thing about God, is that he has a set of rules. He's not just, hey, just come and do whatever you want, and I'm not going to be watching over you. He has a plan for our life, and he pretty much lays it down and says, if you don't operate according to my rules, I'm going to cut you loose, like you do with your patients.
The rules are foundational, but don't forget, we are not under law, but under grace.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Always got to hear Dickie say that, because he believes it. He really believes it.
So I'm going to let you go now, okay?
But, yeah. Thanks, Dickie. We're going to finish in prayer here, so we'll see you another time, Dickie. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right. So, Derek,
Yes.
would you be so good as to pray for us?
Yeah. Can you hear
Do
me?
you feel like you know what to pray for? We've been pretty general here.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you as broken people without you, and as the image of you with you. Help us to understand that gap. Help us to be motivated towards you in that gap. Help us to connect with Jesus. Our eyes have been opened to the perils of this world, and you have all the answers. You know what it looks like to have restoration. You know what it looks like to have the renewing of our minds. You tell us to capture every thought and make it obedient to you. And give us that ability and that mindset so that as we are mastering it, we can bring others along with us. And as we master one particular area of our life, we are then able to reach out to others and show them how we've done it through you so that they can do the same in their way with you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for giving us a place to come and to talk and focus on you in the midst of this wild world that we are calling 2020. Thank you for just your love and your grace and your commitment to us almost no matter what we do. Just bless us as we go into next week and keep these conversations on our minds so that they can be healing and encouraging and edifying. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Derek.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the weekend. We're heading back down to Louisville from Madison tomorrow. We've been up here visiting my daughter and her husband and our little granddaughter. So kind of in the midst of moving. They're moving to a new house. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Donna and Jim. Thanks, Songhwan. Thanks, Philip. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.